secreting more progesterone. But because of the deficiency of T3, there are too few luteinizing hormone receptors for LH from the pituitary to stimulate the conversion of that ovum into a corpus luteum. And the woman ends up with too little progesterone, and one symptom of that is migraine headaches. And also, the woman can be colder than other women during the luteal phase because she's not secreting enough progesterone. And progesterone normally stimulates the release of norepinephrine and noradrenaline that warms up the body. And so it can, one step after another can cause the woman to have a pretty awful time of the menstrual period.
Yeah, absolutely. And in menopause, do you often find that progesterone is a valuable addition to your protocol?
Well, yeah, and we have to be careful about that. And the main thing we watch for is adrenocortical health, because after a woman has run out of ova in the ovaries, the main source of estrogen and progesterone is probably going to be the cortex of the adrenal glands, even though a good bit of the DHEA that gets secreted is converted by fat cells into sex hormones. But the main thing we watch out for is if a woman comes in and she's postmenopausal and not having symptoms of estrogen and progesterone deficiency, if she starts on an effective dose of thyroid hormone, it accelerates the pathway in the liver that clears estrogen and progesterone and cortisol out of the body at a faster rate. And so we have to be very careful in making sure that we don't induce deficiencies of those hormones. And if the woman begins developing deficiencies of them, we immediately address possible underfunctioning of the adrenal cortex.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, so just on another couple of things before we finish, but one of the things that I really liked in your book was that you talk about food as being one of the essential factors that people need to address to get really good results. So I lecture on the same thing. If people don't build a really solid foundation of health first by looking at the type of foods they're eating, then it's very difficult to get well using other techniques like herbs or supplements or even thyroid hormone if they're not eating well. So unfortunately, even today, a lot of naturopaths are using the bottle of pills approach rather than counselling patients on their lifestyle choices, which is quite a shame. So you address that as well.
Well, right. We run into a lot of patients who just don't care to adopt a wholesome diet, and their solution is the bottle of pills, which you mentioned. Okay, it's okay that I don't eat vegetables and fruit. I'll just take carotenoid complex to make up for it. I run into that a great deal, and it's one of my most frustrating aspects of clinical care, getting people to change over to a wholesome diet. And in the U.S., the typical American diet, the meat and potatoes type cafeteria diet, is now called a pro-inflammatory diet. And we know that it increases the production of inflammatory cytokines that can even signal the brain that I'm not well. And most of the fibers that feed back from the abdominal and thoracic cavity go to the hypothalamus and can produce a shift in activity that can actually be that prodromal period of illness, just not feeling well. And what I try to get patients to do is either what I call a cave person diet or a Mediterranean diet, because I think the epidemiological studies, and those people who study large populations of people, say that the Mediterranean people, if anybody is healthy and has more longevity, it's those people. And they rely on their Mediterranean diet. A lot of like olive oil that's supposedly 75% oleic acid. You know more about the nutritional aspects of that than I would.
The food side of it, But, I think one of the important things, one of the important things is that people need to understand, I think, is that the only diet that humans are not adapted to is a processed food diet. We do well on any number of whole foods as long as they're not processed. And that's one of the important things that I talk to people about is, if it's not found in nature, then don't eat it.
Right, and we don't find dioxins, PCBs, and organophosphates in nature, the pesticides, the herbicides. So we really push organic diet.
Yes.
And I certainly appreciate your philosophy on that. And I've been sending more and more people to your website for background information because whereas we concentrate so much on the hormones, it certainly is a help with wonderful sites like yours for patients to go as part of our educational packet, to help inform them of what they should do.
Thank you. Well, one of the other important factors that I wanted to mention with the recovery is the exercise to tolerance. And I know there's many people listening who just shake their heads with that one because they're lucky to have enough energy to walk from the bedroom to the kitchen, let alone exercise. Or they're in so much pain that they feel like they can't exercise at all. It's just something they don't do. So how important is this point in people's recovery, and what do you recommend to people who've been so tired that they haven't exercised in years?
Well, I always suggest that they start out with, if nothing else, picking up a tennis ball and lightly squeezing it. We know from imaging studies that if someone just grabs the edge of the table and lightly squeezes it, the opposite side, the motor area, the opposite side of the brain lights up with increased blood flow and increased metabolism. So even if it's a very gentle exercise, if it's going up on the toes, lifting the heels off the floor, leaning against the wall once a day, it helps get physiology moving in the right direction. I caution patients not to exercise beyond their tolerance because if they have too little thyroid hormone regulation, they'll have too many of a slowdown type receptor called alpha-2 adrenergic receptors, and if they stimulate vigorously enough to release adrenaline and noradrenaline, it will bind to those inhibitory receptors. That will increase peripheral resistance to blood flow and decrease the flow of blood tissues, and it'll also slow down energy metabolism in cells. So my caution is always exercise below a level of intensity that will cause adrenaline and noradrenaline to be secreted. But start out with something. If it's nothing that before you get out of bed in the morning, lift your head up one time and feel your abdominal muscles contract once and go ahead and roll out of bed. That's a start. And it helps create, I think, a habit of doing resistance type activities and aerobic type activities that can eventually develop into a momentum where when the person does have the metabolic wherewithal to exercise vigorously, the habit patterns will already be there.
And vigorous exercise does enhance the treatment once people are able to do that?
Well, if the people have too little thyroid hormone regulation, I remember being delighted and really puzzled. Women would come in and say, when they finally reached an effective dose of thyroid hormone, would come in and say, for the first time in 10 years, I did power house cleaning. And I didn't understand power house cleaning at the time, but they explained that I cleaned the entire house in one day, and I haven't done that in 10 years. But, and it's important even at that point because the patients observe the principle of exercise tolerance because if the people are deconditioned, they can still become so sore that it can maybe create some disinclination to go at the exercise again. And I don't want them to get discouraged. So just gradualness, I think, is a good principle to go by.
Yeah. So in summary, if someone has been diagnosed with fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue, or they suspect they have thyroid issues or hypometabolism, what do they need to do step by step to get better? What are the important points there?